The air in Amsterdam in the summer of 1942 was thick, not just with the scent of canals and damp stone, but with a growing, palpable fear. For a 13-year-old girl like Elise Van Amstel, the world had narrowed to the confines of curfews, star-shaped badges, and the relentless, suffocating pressure of a life no longer her own. Elise lived on the Mrueta Plain, just a short walk from the Franks. Her friendship with Anne Frank was a vibrant, clashing, perfect harmony of opposites. Anne, all effervescence, laughter, and dazzling ambition, was the sun. Elise, quieter, observing, with a dry wit and a mind like a steel trap, was the steady moon. Together, they were an unstoppable force of teenage energy, despite the world trying its best to stop them. It was mid-June, and Anne had just celebrated her 13th birthday. Elise remembered the party, the slightly forced cheerfulness of the adults, and the centerpiece of the celebration, a small, red and white checkered cloth-bound autograph book. "It's not just an autograph book, Elise," Anne had declared, holding it to her chest like a treasure map. "It's going to be a real diary, a confidant. I've decided I'll write to an imaginary friend, someone who understands." Elise smiled, a small genuine curl of her lip. "You'll write to an imaginary friend because, as usual, no real friend is dramatic enough for your grand plans, Anne." Anne had swatted her arm playfully. "Don't be jealous. You already have a real friend. Me." But the truth was, Elise already had her own secret. It wasn't a red and white book. It was a sturdy, deep blue notebook, the kind her father, a quiet man who worked at a small publishing house before the restrictions, had brought home for scrap paper. It was bound in heavy cardstock, and its pages were the color of weak tea, smelling faintly of ink and dust. Elise didn't write to an imaginary friend. She wrote simply to the silence. June 25th, 1942. Dear Silence, the world is becoming one endless gray instruction. New decrees every week. No bikes, no trams, no theaters. Now, no visiting non-Jewish friends after 8 o'clock. Soon, I suppose, there will be no air. Anne is ecstatic about her diary. She spent an hour telling me how she's going to fill it with profound observations and daring social commentary. She is so bright, so undimmed by everything. It's like watching a candle flame in a hurricane. Beautiful, but you know it can't last. I wish I had her lightness. My mother cries a little more each day. Quiet, head in hands crying in the kitchen after Father goes to bed. She keeps looking at the suitcases stacked in the attic, the ones for the next holiday. But we all know the holiday is a lie. It's an escape. The question is not if we must leave, but when we will be forced to. I write this under my mattress with a flashlight, hoping the thin walls of our apartment don't carry the scratching of the pen. Anne is desperate for a real friend, someone to tell everything to. I am desperate for the opposite, to be invisible, to be quiet, to be forgotten by the men with the shiny boots. I don't want my words to matter. I just want them to exist here so that a piece of me, the real me, can't be taken. It is easier to be Elise in the stars than Elise in Amsterdam right now. The last few weeks of June were a blur of nervous activity. Margot Frank, Anne's older sister, received a dreaded call-up notice, a summons to report for a work camp in Germany. The official lie was crumbling, and the Frank family vanished almost overnight, leaving behind a carefully staged illusion of a hasty departure to Switzerland. Elise was one of the few who knew the truth. Otto Frank, Anne's father, had confided in her parents.
the secret annex above the office building on the Prinsengracht. Her parents, too, had been making their own arrangements, desperate plans with distant, uncertain family contacts. But a place of refuge, a proper hiding place, had not yet materialized. The day after the Franks disappeared, Elise stood on the Merwetaplein, the red and white striped awning of the corner store flapping in the breeze. The Franks' flat looked unnervingly normal. The windows closed, the front door locked. "They're gone, Alicia," her mother whispered, her hand trembling on Elise's arm. "They're safe. We must pray." But Elise felt a cold, hard knot in her stomach. Anne was gone. Her laughter, her dramatic pronouncements, the way she made everything feel bigger and brighter, all of it had been swallowed by the silence. She went back to her room, pulled out the blue notebook, and wrote the entry that cemented her purpose. July 7th, 1942. Dear Silence, Anne is in hiding. In a world with no light, she has gone completely dark. I know where she is, a secret so heavy it feels like it might crack my ribs. I cannot tell anyone. I cannot even think about it too loudly in my own head. But her disappearance feels like a signal, a starting gun. We are next. When we go, wherever we go, I will be the one who remembers. Anne is writing her story for the world, for the true friend she hopes to find. I will write mine only for the dead, or for the future when the world is done with all this noise. My father keeps telling me to be brave, but I think bravery is overrated. Survival is what matters. And for me, survival means keeping this blue notebook close, keeping it secret. It will hold the shadows so they don't consume me entirely. If Anne is the hope of the future, then I will be the memory of the past. I will record the fear, the hunger, the silence of a life that ceases to be real. I will not be Anne Frank. I will be Elise Van Amstel, and this is my confession to the silence.
The summer heat pressed down on Amsterdam, a physical weight that mirrored the psychological one. After the Franks vanished, an unnatural quiet settled over the Merwetaplein. Elise avoided the block, feeling too exposed, too close to the gaping hole Anne had left in her life. July crawled by, marked by the dwindling number of Jewish faces in the streets and the rising sense of dread in the Van Amstel apartment. Elise's parents had secured a temporary, tenuous hiding place, a tiny room above a bicycle repair shop owned by a kind, nervous resistance contact named Mr. Decker. It was not the holiday in Switzerland they had spoken of, but it was a place where the yellow star could be peeled away, at least for a while. July 29th, 1942. Dear Silence, we leave tomorrow. It is not an escape, it is a retreat. My father says we must become mouse quiet. That's his word for it. Mouse quiet, as if being small and silent is enough to survive a hawk. Mother packed 2 small suitcases. Everything we own is now a lie of what fits. She made me choose only 1 book, 1 toy, and my school papers. The book I chose was the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke. The toy was the wooden bird Anne and I carved during a long rainy afternoon last year. The school papers were a sacrifice. I had to leave behind my drawing pad, the one I filled with charcoal sketches of people on the street. They are too dangerous now. Faces can betray you. My mother does not know about the blue notebook. It is not in the suitcase. It is hidden in the lining of my winter coat, which is already too hot for this weather, but which I must carry. It is the only thing that feels completely mine. I keep rereading the last poem Anne slipped into my hand the day before she disappeared. It was something about the beauty of blossoms and how spring will always return.
I read it and I feel annoyed. Anne is so focused on the return of spring. I am only concerned with surviving the winter. When I look in the mirror now, I don't see Elise Van Amstel. I see an imitation, a ghost preparing to haunt a small room. The move itself was executed under the shroud of early morning darkness. Elise walked between her parents, her small backpack feeling heavy as stone, her heart beating a frantic, noisy rhythm against her ribs. The blue notebook pressed against her back, a constant, secret companion. The room above the bicycle shop was less a room than more an attic extension, low-ceilinged, stiflingly hot, and perpetually smelling of rubber and oil. It had one window, sealed shut, facing a brick wall. There was a cot for her parents, a thin straw mattress for Elise, and a small, rickety table. The silence here was different from the silence on the streets. This was a forced, unnatural quiet, punctuated only by the muffled clang of Mr. Decker's tools below and the far-off whistle of a train, a sound that to Elise's ears no longer meant travel, but transport. One evening, about a week into their confinement, the anxiety finally broke Elise. Her parents were asleep, exhausted by the day's tension and the oppressive heat. Elise was lying on her straw mattress, unable to breathe past a fear that clung to the air like dust. She reached for her notebook and wrote feverishly, not to the silence, but about a specific sound. August 5th, 1942. Dear Silence, I hate the sound of the church bells. They ring every hour, every day, indifferent to the people disappearing below them. They are a constant reminder of the world that continues without us. A world where people can walk into a church, pray to a God who seems to be looking elsewhere, and then go home to a meal without checking for soldiers. My father told me the bells sound like a hammer hitting an empty can. Dull, meaningless. He told me they are beautiful, a sign of hope. He said we must hold on to the beauty that is still outside, even if we can't touch it. He is trying to be strong for Mother, but I see the tremor in his hands when he takes his glasses off at night. He pretends to be reading Rilke, but he is only staring at the same page for an hour. Anne would find something romantic in this hiding place. She would write about the dramatic irony of living above a shop that fixes bicycles, yet we can't ride one. She would personify the rats, name the dust motes. I only see the dirt. I only hear the bells. The sound is a weight. It is the real-world ticking clock of my youth being stolen. Anne's diary is a testament to her vibrant life. Mine is becoming a tombstone for mine. I have started drawing again. Tiny, almost invisible figures etched with a dull pencil on the margins of these blue pages. Not faces, just shapes. People huddled. People running. Because I can't risk putting a face on paper. A face is a record. A face can be remembered. The mouse quiet is unbearable. I want to scream at the bells. I want to tell them that the time they mark is no longer real for us. The small, suffocating reality of the attic began to feel permanent. Elise's world shrunk to the few feet of the room, the sound of the bells, and the scratch of her own pen. These observations were not Anne's cheerful, hopeful reflections. They were the desperate anchors of a mind fighting to hold on to reality. The blue notebook was the only place she could release the noise, transforming fear into ink. As August gave way to September 1942, the monotony of hiding began to wear down the Van Amstels. The space felt smaller, the air thinner, and the mouse quiet demanded by Mr. Decker became a psychological burden. To pass the hours, Elise's parents would whisper old family stories or read silently from the few books they possessed. Elise, however, found herself obsessively reviewing the details of the world outside, her mind a persistent, unwelcome reporter. The blue notebook was the only place she could release the noise, transforming fear into ink. September 10th, 1942. Dear Silence, we haven't seen the sun in weeks, only the glow on the opposite brick wall. The outside world reaches us only through the smells, damp earth after a rain, the sickly sweet scent of burning peat, and, most powerfully, the soap from the laundry next door. I can hear the women talking sometimes, their voices a muffled drone that sounds like freedom itself. Today, Mother was talking about Anne. She said she hoped Anne was happy, writing her stories and being looked after. My mother has this image of the secret annex as a sanctuary, a cozy little apartment filled with books and gentle people. She doesn't know Anne, not really. Anne is not built for quiet sanctuaries. She is a firework, and you don't put a firework in a drawer. I wonder what Anne is writing about. I bet she's recording the dramas of the people she's hiding with. I bet she has named every cobweb and analyzed the personalities of the cats in the courtyard. She's probably writing about the beautiful things, the clouds passing the tiny attic window, the romance of Peter Van Daan. I think of her with a strange mix of envy and fear. Envy because she has a reason to keep writing, to be the voice of her family. Fear because I know Anne will never truly be mouse quiet. Her voice is too loud, even on paper. That loudness is her power, but it is also her danger.
I, on the other hand, am mastering the art of the miniature. My world is the 2 by 3 foot space around my mattress. I am learning to move without disturbing the dust. I am learning to speak without moving my mouth. But the memories are noisy. I keep seeing Anne's face when we last talked. She asked me, almost pleading, to come over after dinner. I said I couldn't because of the curfew. She looked disappointed, but then, bright as ever, she just waved and said, "Well then, I'll just have to write it all down." I wish I had gone. I wish I had risked the curfew. I wish I had one last real, unscripted moment with the only person who truly understood how impossible it was to be a girl in this city. A few nights later, an intense, almost unbearable urge took hold of Elise. She had to see the annex. She had to verify that Anne was there, safe, still writing. It was a foolish, reckless impulse, but the psychological pressure of the small room had grown too great. Her parents were deep asleep, their breathing synchronized. Elise carefully opened the window a crack, a violation of Mr. Decker's strict rules, and the cool, crisp autumn air rushed in, startling her with its freshness. She put on the heavy coat with the notebook sewn into the lining, pulling the collar high over her face. Slipping out of the bicycle shop was terrifyingly simple. The back door, used for deliveries, was secured only with a light bolt. The walk was a nightmare in miniature. The streets of Amsterdam were deserted, dark and silent, the kind of silence that means something is wrong. Every shadow seemed to move, every distant siren made her freeze. She walked the longer route to the Prinsgracht, avoiding the familiar paths. When she finally reached the old warehouse, the Opekta offices, her breath hitched. It looked menacingly normal. The curtains were drawn on the tall windows of the annex, but a single faint ribbon of light seemed to bleed out from the rear of the building. Elise pressed herself against the cold, wet stone wall of the canal across the street, her heart hammering. The light was so small, so insignificant, but to Elise it was a beacon. It was proof. Anne was there. She thought of crossing the street, maybe getting closer. But just then, a police patrol rounded the distant corner, their boots scraping the cobbles. She ducked,
scrambling behind a stack of empty crates, the rough wood catching the wool of her coat. Elise waited, frozen, until the footsteps faded. Her cheek was pressed against the cold, damp stone. She tasted fear, metallic and bitter. When she finally stood up, she didn't look back at the warehouse. She had what she needed. The ghost was real. The light was burning. Now she just had to make it back to her own silence. September 15th, 1942. Dear Silence, I broke the rules. I left. I went to the Prinsgracht. I saw the light. It was a stupid, unforgivable risk, and if my parents knew, they would be horrified. But I had to. The silence here had become a vacuum, and I needed to see something real, even a flicker. Anne is there. The thought feels like a physical connection, a thin, unbreakable thread stretched across the dark city. She is writing, and I am writing. I realized something tonight. Anne writes to a friend, Kitty, to feel less alone. I write to the silence to embrace the aloneness. The deeper I bury myself in these pages, the less real the world outside becomes. This notebook isn't a lifeline. It's an escape hatch into myself. I am a witness to my own unmaking. I am watching Elise van Amstel dissolve into mouse quiet and ink. And I must record it all. The fear, the recklessness, the endless deafening church bells. Because if I don't, the outside world will believe that we simply vanished, that we turned into ghosts the moment we took off the star. We are not ghosts yet. We are witnesses. The fall of 1942 brought a relentless parade of gray, rainy days. The moisture made the smell of motor oil and rubber from the shop below more potent, and the cold seeped into Elise's bones, even with the blue notebook hidden in her heavy coat. The tension in the small attic room was becoming a physical entity, something they had to breathe around. October 8th, 1942. Dear Silence, my parents are arguing, quietly. It's always about the future, which is something we are supposed to pretend still exists. Mother wants to move to her cousin's farm in the south. Father says it's too far and too dangerous to travel. The real argument, I know, is about hope. Mother holds it like a shield, and Father holds it like a broken glass he's afraid to touch. I have started listening to the conversations of the people in the laundry next door. I press my ear to the sealed window. The voices are just murmurs, but sometimes a clear phrase cuts through, as "the trains are fuller now," or "they took the whole street." These little fragments of the outside world are our only news. It is a terrible way to learn what's happening, like trying to judge a storm by listening to a whisper. Today I dreamt of Anne. We were sitting at our old school desks, and she was drawing a portrait of me. But in the dream, she wasn't using a pencil. She was using a sharp, brilliant piece of yellow chalk. When she held up the drawing, it wasn't my face. It was the yellow star, drawn perfectly, centered on the page. I woke up crying, but silently. My mother only stirred and thought I was dreaming of being hungry. I am hungry, yes, but mostly for the world before the yellow, for a time when our identity was not a mandatory high-visibility symbol. I wonder if Anne dreams of me. Does she ever think of our last conversation, the curt no I gave her about the curfew? Does she miss the way we used to make fun of the silly Dutch boys who tried to flirt with us? Or is she too busy being a historian and a chronicler of great human dramas to remember the small, silly dramas of our friendship? I need her to remember the small things, because the small things are the only way to prove we were real before we became history. As the days shortened, Elise developed a ritual. Every afternoon, while her parents took their short, fitful nap, she would take out the blue notebook. She didn't just write, she analyzed. She tried to apply logic to the terrifying illogic of the war, searching for patterns, for an exit. She began compiling a list in the back of the notebook, titled The Logic of Lies. Lie number 1, the trains are for work. Truth, no one returns, the journey is the work. Lie number 2, Switzerland. Truth, the hiding is the destination, there is no other safe place. Lie number 3, the war will be short. Truth, it is already the entirety of my memory. Lie number 4, hope is enough. Truth, only meticulous caution is enough. She was trying to build a fortress out of facts, a way to keep the emotional tide of fear and despair at bay. One afternoon, Mr. Decker slipped into the attic room for a brief, tense visit. He brought a small bag of stale bread, and more importantly to Elise, a discarded newspaper. It was a Dutch paper, heavily censored, but still a direct link to the outside world. Elise devoured it immediately, and that night she wrote,
November 2, 1942. Dear Silence, the newspaper brought by Mr. Decker mentioned reorganization of labor and voluntary relocations. The words are so clean, so clinical. They smell like bleach over blood. My father read the military movements section, the battles in North Africa, the constant slow grind in Russia. He said the Allies are making progress, that the end is coming. Maybe in a year, maybe 2. A year? 2 years? That is an eternity in this room. That is the rest of my childhood. If the war ends when I am 16, I won't know how to be a normal person anymore. I will only know how to be quiet. I saw a drawing on the paper, a small cartoon of a smiling farmer driving a tractor. The normalcy of the image was obscene. Do people really still worry about crops? Do people really still smile without checking the shadows first? I turned the paper over and began copying the names of the towns being bombed. Tobruk, Stalingrad, places impossibly far away. I wrote them in a tiny script beneath my list of lies. I feel closer to the chaos there than I do to the quiet street below. The war outside is loud and honest. The life inside Amsterdam is quiet and deceitful. Anne would be writing an essay on the irony of the farmer's smile. I am just writing a record of my growing resentment. I think the resentment is the most dangerous thing I possess. It is noisy, and I must be mouse quiet. I am not just hiding from the Nazis. I am hiding from my own rage. The blue notebook is the only place it is permitted to exist. The winter of 1942 descended upon the attic room with brutal efficiency. The flimsy walls did little to keep out the cold, and the Van Amstels spent their days huddled under blankets, rationing not just food, but warmth. The constant gnawing hunger became a shared, unspoken companion. For Elise, the close quarters magnified her sense of isolation. Her parents, concerned only with survival and finding strength in their shared fear, seemed to grow closer. Elise felt herself drifting away, her reality confined entirely to the space between her own ears, mediated only by the blue notebook. December 19th, 1942. Dear Silence, it is so cold that the ink runs sluggishly on the page. My fingers ache. My mother spends hours mending the same pair of socks, the needlework a hypnotic, quiet sound. My father just stares at the wall, and I know he is counting the moments until this ends. I am not counting moments anymore. I am just trying to survive the hour.
Loneliness here is a strange creature. It is not the loneliness of being without friends. I miss Anne desperately, but that is a specific ache. This is the loneliness of being unseen by the people you're closest to. My parents see their daughter, the child they must protect. They don't see Elise, the recorder, the furious observer, the girl who is mentally mapping every loose floorboard and every scrape of sound. I have started studying the map of Amsterdam that Father smuggled in. It is creased and water-stained. I trace the streets where I used to ride my bicycle, and I mark the known danger zones. But the most interesting geography is the one inside the house. I have drawn a map of our tiny room in the back of the notebook, the land of the bedbugs, the continent of the storage crates, and the window to nowhere. My mattress is the island of self. It is the only place where I can be completely, truthfully myself, hidden from the pity and worry in my parents' eyes. I imagine Anne is doing the same, mapping the annex, transforming their prison into an architectural drama. But while Anne is probably naming the rooms after kings or historical events, making her hiding place grand, I am making mine small, contained, and cold. I need it to be cold so I don't forget the reality when I write. I believe Anne would call this self-pity. I call it precision. The quiet of the house was broken one night by a sudden jarring sound. Not the bells, not a distant siren, but the unmistakable squeak of the front door of the bicycle shop opening long after curfew. Elise froze. Her parents' eyes met hers in the dark. Her father quickly placed a trembling hand over her mother's mouth, a silent command for absolute quiet. Footsteps, heavy, military boots. They were loud and clumsy and moving directly beneath their room. Elise's heart hammered against the mattress. She realized with terrifying clarity that the attic room, their sanctuary, offered no defense at all. They were entirely vulnerable. She instinctively reached for her coat and pressed the hard spine of the blue notebook against her chest. If they were discovered, she had a momentary irrational thought, they will not find this. It was a small, defiant act of preservation. The footsteps paused directly under their floorboards. Elise could hear a gruff exchange in German, followed by the clatter of what sounded like tools being moved. It seemed endless. Minutes stretched into an eternity of held breath. Finally, the voices receded and the front door squeaked shut. After a long period of silence, her mother began to weep, a quiet, broken sound muffled against her father's shoulder. Elise lay perfectly still, not crying, but feeling the adrenaline surge leave her body, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve.
December 20, 1942. Dear Silence. They were here. Directly beneath us. I heard them breathe. I heard them speak the language of fire and steel. They were not looking for us, I think, but for something else. Perhaps just a convenient place to check for supplies, or maybe a shortcut. The experience has taught me a terrible truth. We are not hidden. We are only ignored. And being ignored is a temporary condition. The moment a search becomes thorough, we will be found. My parents are devastated. They are clinging to each other, their faith in our little sanctuary shattered. They want to talk about it, to comfort each other with hopeful words. I cannot. I have no words for them. I have only this record. When the boots were below me, I felt a deep, strange calm. My mind was not racing with fear, but organizing. I thought, where will I hide the notebook if they break the door? In the chimney? In the oil can below the mattress? My first and only thought was to protect this truth, this record. Anne writes to communicate, to share the burden of her life with Kitty. I write to contain the burden, to keep it secret. My diary is not a plea for recognition. It is a confession of the fear I will not show and the rage I cannot speak. It is the real Elise, the one they will never catch, because she is already sealed in blue cardstock. I am ready for the cold. I am ready for the silence. The first weeks of 1943 brought no relief, only a deeper, more entrenched sense of endurance. Food was scarcer, the cold more biting, and the constant strain of enforced quiet began to take its toll on the Van Amstels. Elise's father grew withdrawn, spending hours meticulously cleaning his spectacles, a nervous habit that filled the silence with a tiny, repetitive squeak. January 28, 1943. Dear Silence, we are now fully inside the waiting. Waiting is not a passive act, it is a labor. It is the work of keeping your body still while your mind races like a frightened mouse. It is the work of pretending you have a future when all the evidence suggests you do not. My father says we are like sailors becalmed waiting for the wind to change, but I think we are more like seeds buried in the winter earth. We are waiting for the earth to warm, but we are too deep down to know if the sun is still shining at all. The hunger is a sharp thing now, not a dull ache. It makes me irritable and fixated. I spend too much time thinking about the last meal I truly enjoyed. Mother's apple cake for Anne's 13th birthday. It was cinnamon and butter and real whole sugar. Now the meals are thin soup and hard bread, and they taste like nothing. I am forcing myself to forget the taste of butter. It is easier to be hungry if you can't remember what it means to be full. I wonder if Anne is hungry too. But Anne would be writing essays about the moral implications of sharing a potato peel. She would find drama in the emptiness. I just feel the emptiness. The difference between us is that Anne is always looking out, at the world, at her companions, at Kitty. I am only ever looking in. The blue notebook is my rationing. I cannot ration my food, but I can ration my truth. I can only let out small measured amounts of fear each day, otherwise it will consume all the pages at once. A small, unexpected connection to the outside world arrived in February, delivered by Mr. Decker. He brought an item so mundane, so ordinary, that its presence felt like a miracle. A single, perfectly ripe orange. It was a staggering luxury, and Elise's mother wept when she saw it. The family decided to share it, a deliberate ritual of normalcy. Elise's father sectioned it with painstaking care, making sure each of them received an equal crescent. Elise took her piece. The smell was overpowering, a blast of sun and distance, a scent that mocked the perpetual dimness of the addict. As she slowly peeled it, the juice misting into the air, she was overcome by a sudden, intense memory. She remembered Anne, a year ago, peeling an orange for her, demanding that Elise try the trick of twisting the peel to make a tiny burning oil flare. It was a silly, charming moment, completely disconnected from the current darkness. Elise could not bring herself to eat the slice. February 15th, 1943. Dear Silence, the orange was an insult, a perfect, vivid orange, delivered into this gray tomb. It made the silence here feel heavier, the cold more profound. We shared it, and my parents tried to talk about holidays in the South, about sun and beaches. They tried to make the orange mean hope. I could not eat my piece. I kept it in my hand until it grew warm and sticky. I wanted to keep the smell, the memory of its presence, without consuming the reality. Eating it would mean it was gone forever. Not eating it means the possibility of the sun is still sitting on my palm. I remembered Anne, and I realized what the true difference is between our diaries. Anne is writing a letter to Kitty, a friend who is waiting outside, in the sun, ready to receive her truth. I am writing a letter to Elise, the girl who was already gone, swallowed by the war, the one who was already a shadow. I am trying to prove that she existed before she became a statistic. I finally wrote a single word on the orange slice before the juice ruined the ink. Just A. for Anne.
I left it on the ledge of the sealed window. A small offering to the sun I cannot see. It felt like the truest thing I have done in months.
I have decided I will not forget the taste of butter or the smell of oranges. I will not let the hunger win. I will hold the memories, sharp and painful, until the very end. Spring arrived in the attic, not as a rush of warmth, but as a subtle shift in the light that filtered through the tiny, sealed window. The days grew longer, but the hope of liberation felt no closer. The constant close quarters were grating on Elisa's parents, leading to hushed arguments that sounded louder than any shout. March 17th, 1943. Dear Silence. My parents had a terrible argument today. It wasn't about the war or the food. It was about a pair of scissors. Mother couldn't find them. Father insisted she had put them in the wrong place. The argument was sharp and quick, but it left a lingering coldness in the air, much worse than the February chill. This place does that. It takes small things, a missing tool, a slightly loud cough, a tiny sliver of bread, and turns them into weapons. We are so busy surviving the outside that we have forgotten how to survive each other. I retreated to my corner. I looked at the map I drew of this room, the island of self, and realized I have been spending too much time there. I am becoming isolated even from my own family, the only people I have left. I used the argument as an excuse to do something I've wanted to do for months. I took my needle and thread and carefully cut open the lining of my coat where the blue notebook is hidden. I need to take it out. I need to hold it fully, without the barrier of wool and thread. Holding it feels dangerous. It's heavy. It's a solid block of all the unspoken words, the unshed tears, the unreleased anger. It is the real Elise Van Amstel, and she is far heavier than the thin, quiet girl my parents see. Driven by a sudden, intense longing for the camaraderie and noise of her old life, Elise decided to write a letter, not in her diary, and not to the silence. She wrote a letter directly to Anne. It was an impossible act, a letter that could never be sent, but the act of writing felt like reaching a hand across the darkness that separated the two hiding places. She tore a piece of paper from her father's smuggled newspaper, a blank margin next to a report on potato prices, and wrote in a tiny, hurried script. Dearest Anne, I hope Kitty is listening to you. I hope you are still as loud as ever. I hope you have enough paper. The church bells here are still ringing, and I still hate them. They sound like a judgment. Do you remember the day we skipped Latin class to go to the park and ended up talking for 3 hours about boys and philosophy? You said you wanted to change the world with your words. I said I just wanted to read the stars. I am not reading the stars now. I am reading the stains on the ceiling. I'm reading the worry on my parents' faces. I'm reading the newspaper snippets Mr. Decker brings, and they only confirm that the world outside has gone mad. I envy you, Anne. You have a purpose. To tell the story. I only have the purpose of enduring. I am a passive witness, just waiting for the curtain to fall. You are fighting this war with your pen. I am fighting it by being quiet. Please tell me which way is better. I am hiding a blue notebook. I write to the silence. It is my only companion. I am afraid that when this is over, the silence will have taught me so well that I won't know how to speak anymore. Be safe. Be loud. Your friend, Elise. Elise held the unsent letter for a long time, the thin paper warm from her grip. It was a reckless relic of her former self, and she couldn't bring herself to destroy it. She couldn't send it either. That night she wrote her final entry on the matter in the blue notebook, carefully folding the letter and placing it inside the center pages, sealing it with a small, dry leaf she had preserved from the previous autumn. March 18th, 1943. Dear Silence, I wrote to Anne today, a stupid, dangerous letter. It is the first truly hopeful thing I have done, because to write a letter, even an unsent one, you must believe there is still a person on the other side, a future, where she might read it. I realize that my envy of Anne is not about her fame or her confidence. It is because she still has the capacity for joy. She is probably still laughing, even in the annex. I have lost the ability to laugh. The unsent letter is a weight. It is a beacon. It is a prayer. I have sealed it into these blue pages. It is a secret within a secret. The last desperate link to the person I was before the yellow star. It is the one word in this book that is not for the silence. I will not write to Anne again. It drains too much energy, too much precious guarded hope. From now on, I return to my work, the record of the cold, the hunger, the silence, the work of the invisible girl. I am sealed, and I am waiting.
The spring of 1943 faded into a summer that was more bearable physically. The heat at least provided some warmth, but psychologically devastating. The war was dragging on, and the initial desperate hope that the occupation would be brief was gone, replaced by the grim realization that their life in the attic was a state of being, not a temporary inconvenience. July 4, 1943. Dear Silence, today is a holiday in the country that I used to imagine was a shimmering, endless place of freedom, America. I remember seeing a film once, a noisy parade with flags and music. Here, there are only the sounds of the laundry next door and the distant clang of the trams, reminding me that the city still moves without me. My father says the Allies are pushing into Italy. He traces the shape of the boot of Europe on the old map, his finger shaking slightly. Every inch of ground gained is a reason for him to smile, a fleeting, thin expression that doesn't quite reach his eyes. My mother takes these small victories and turns them into plans. When the war ends, we will go to the sea. We will eat fresh fish and not think about bread. I listen to them, and I find I cannot join them in their hope. I have become immune to it. I see their joy, and I feel only the exhaustion of keeping watch. Hope requires energy, and I need all my energy just to stay mouse quiet. I have spent the last few weeks trying to analyze the nature of memory. If I were to vanish now, what would remain of Elise Van Amstel? Only a few things. This blue notebook, a wooden bird, and the ghost of a girl who hated the sound of church bells. I realize that my memories of Anne are becoming distant, as if she were a character in a book I read a long time ago. Her face is vivid, but her voice is starting to thin. I have to work to recall the exact timbre of her laugh, that loud, brassy sound that was so unlike my own quiet smile. I think I am letting her memory fade because it is too painful to hold. Remembering her means remembering the before, the life of school, bicycles, and freedom. And the before is a country I can no longer visit. The only memory that remains crystal clear is the moment I left my house, leaving the unmade bed and the half-finished book on my desk. I remember the precision of that staging. We are all living a staged life now, waiting for the audience to leave. The heat became oppressive, and with it the threat of disease. Elise's father fell ill with a fever.
The situation was instantly critical. Calling a doctor was impossible. Mr. Decker risked bringing them a few old medicines, but the illness took hold rapidly. Elise watched her father decline, his usually meticulous hands shaking uncontrollably, his quiet voice reduced to a dry, hacking cough. Her mother was frantic, applying cool compresses and praying in choked whispers. During one long night, as Elise sat by her father's side, she took out the blue notebook. She didn't write for herself that night. She wrote an observation, a record of profound despair, and a promise. August 20th, 1943. Dear Silence, the silence tonight is different. It is the silence that follows a great noise, the silence of exhaustion. Father is so sick. He is speaking nonsense now, fragments of German and Dutch, reliving moments from his own childhood. Mother is weeping silently. She keeps wiping his brow and whispering, "You must not leave us." I think of the unsent letter to Anne, sealed within these pages. I think of Anne's hope, and I understand now that my parents' hope is not a shield. It is a terrible vulnerability. It means they still have something to lose. I think I shed all my hope when I hid this notebook. I chose survival over expectation. I made a bargain with the silence tonight. I promised that if my father lives, I will stop writing about the bad things. I will fill the next pages with the small good things that still exist. The smell of the orange peel, the feel of clean water, the rhythm of my mother's breathing. I need him to live, not just for us, but because his presence is the last remaining piece of the world that made sense. I will not let the silence take him. I will not let the silence win. Slowly, miraculously, Elise's father began to recover. The fever broke after 3 agonizing days. He was weak and thin, but the clear light had returned to his eyes. Elise did not write about the recovery for several days, honoring her vow. Instead, she took her pencil and drew on the last page of her recent entry. It was not a running man or a shape. It was a single, small, perfect wooden bird, the one she and Anne had carved together. When she finally wrote again, she fulfilled her promise, though the words were tinged with a devastating sadness. August 28th, 1943. Dear Silence, Father is better. He is weak, but he is here. The sickness was a powerful reminder. We are not fighting only the soldiers. We are fighting our own bodies, our own fragility. I promised I would write only of the good things now. I will try. Today, Mother smiled at me when I brought her a cup of water. It was a true smile, not one of the strained, worried ones. The taste of the water was clean and cold, a startling pleasure. And tonight the bells rang, and for the first time I did not hear a hammer hitting an empty can. I heard only the sound of time passing.